Jake Collins wiped the grease from his hands as he finished replacing the damaged coolant valve on mining station Epsilon 7. The work was routine but necessary since a broken cooling system meant death in the cold vacuum of space. He had been working on these outer rim stations for 3 years now and knew every bolt and wire by heart. The pay was decent and the solitude suited him just fine after his messy divorce back on Earth. The asteroid they had built the station on was nothing special, just another rock floating in the darkness between star systems. It held enough rare metals to make the mining operation profitable, but not enough to attract the big corporations. That made it perfect for small independent operations like theirs. Jake and his crew of 12 others extracted what they could and shipped it back to human space once a month. He was checking the pressure readings when the proximity alarm started screaming. Jake dropped his tools and rushed to the control room where Sam Martinez was staring at the detection screens with wide eyes. A large ship was approaching fast, and it was not responding to their communication attempts. The vessel was unlike anything Jake had ever seen, with smooth curves and what looked like glowing blue lines running along its hull. The ship suddenly shuddered and began spinning out of control. Jake watched through the observation window as it crashed into the far side of the asteroid, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. The impact shook their entire station, and several warning lights began flashing on their control panels. Whatever. That ship was now stuck on their rock and probably in serious trouble. Sam wanted to wait for the monthly supply ship to arrive before investigating, but Jake knew that whoever was in that crashed vessel might not have that long. He suited up and took the maintenance rover across the rough terrain to where the alien ship had come to rest. The crash had torn a deep gouge in the asteroid surface, and the ship itself was partially buried under loose rock and metal debris. The vessel was definitely not human in origin. Its hull was made of some kind of metal that seemed to shift colors in the light, and those glowing blue lines were definitely not decorative. They pulsed like a heartbeat, which made Jake think the ship might still be alive in some way. He found what looked like an airlock that had been damaged in the crash and managed to force it open with his portable cutting torch. Inside, the ship was a maze of corridors that curved in impossible ways. The walls were covered with symbols that meant nothing to Jake, but they glowed softly, providing enough light to see by. He followed what seemed to be the main corridor toward the front of the ship, calling out in case anyone was still alive. The air was thick and smelled of something sweet that made his nose tingle. He found her in what must have been the command center, surrounded by broken equipment and unconscious. She was tall and slender, with pale blue skin and long white hair that seemed to move on its own. Her clothes were torn, and there was purple blood seeping from a gash on her forehead. Jake had never seen anything like her, but he could tell she was badly hurt and needed help immediately. Getting her back to the station was not easy, since she was heavier than she looked, and his rover was not designed to carry passengers. Jake managed to rig up a makeshift stretcher and drove carefully back across the asteroid terrain. Sam and the others gathered around when he brought the alien woman into their medical bay, but none of them knew what to do for someone who was not human. Jake cleaned her wounds as best he could and tried to make her comfortable. Her blood was indeed purple and seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and her heart rate seemed faster than a human would be normal. He set up a basic 4-drip with saline solution, hoping it would not hurt her, and waited to see if she would wake up. She opened her eyes 6 hours later and immediately tried to sit up. Jake gently pushed her back down and tried to calm her with soothing words, even though he knew she probably could not understand him. Her eyes were large and golden, with vertical pupils like a cat. She stared at him with obvious fear and confusion while making sounds that might have been words in her language. Jake pointed to himself and said his name slowly several times until she seemed to understand. She pointed to herself and made a sound that sounded like Zara, so he decided that must be her name. Communication was difficult, but she seemed to understand that he was trying to help her. When he brought her water, she drank it gratefully, and when he offered food, she ate some of their emergency rations, despite making faces at the taste. Over the next day, Jake worked on building a translation device using parts from her ship, and equipment from their station. He was good with electronics, and the alien technology was fascinating, even if he did not understand how most of it worked. The glowing symbols seemed to respond to touch, and some of the devices appeared to be powered by crystals that hummed with energy. Zara watched him work and sometimes pointed at things or made gestures that helped him understand what certain components might do. She was clearly intelligent and seemed impressed by his improvised solutions to their communication problem. When he finally got the translator working well enough for basic conversation, her first words were a formal thank you followed by urgent warnings about danger. The danger arrived 3 days later in the form of 5 smaller ships that surrounded the asteroid and demanded they surrender the princess. Jake learned that Zara was royalty and that the ships belonged to rebels who wanted to kill her before she could return home. The rebel leader, Commander Vex, spoke perfect English and made it clear that anyone who helped the princes would die. Along with her, Jake looked at Zara, who was still recovering from her injuries, and made a decision that would change both their lives. He activated the station defense systems, which were designed to scare off pirates, and prepared for a fight. The mining station was not built for combat, but Jake knew every inch of it and had some ideas about how to even the odds against trained soldiers with superior weapons and ships. The station defense systems bought them time, but Jake knew they would not hold off 5 warships for long. The mining laser could cut through asteroid rock, but the rebel ships had military-grade shields that absorbed most of the damage. Jake watched from the control room as Commander Vex grew impatient and ordered his ships to move closer for a direct assault on the station. Zara was still weak from her injuries, but she insisted on helping with their defense. She showed Jake how to access the emergency systems on her crashed ship, and together they managed to get some of its weapons online. The alien energy beams were far more powerful than anything the mining station had, but they could only fire a few shots before the damaged power core would overload completely. The rebel attack came at dawn when the asteroid was turning away from the local star. Jake had positioned himself at the mining laser controls while Zara operated her ship weapons from a jury-rigged control panel he had built in their command center. Sam and the other miners took cover in the reinforced storage areas and tried to keep the life support systems running during the battle. Commander Vex sent his fighters in first to test their defenses. Jake waited until they were committed to their attack run, then fired the mining laser at a large chunk of loose asteroid debris. The explosion created a cloud of metal fragments that tore through 2 of the smaller ships and forced the others to retreat. Zara used that moment to fire her energy beams and destroy a 3rd fighter before her weapons overheated. The rebel commander was furious and brought his main ships in for a direct bombardment. Jake knew the station could not survive that kind of assault, so he made a desperate gamble. He overloaded the mining charges they used to break up asteroid rock and detonated them in a pattern that created a massive landslide. Tons of debris crashed down on the station, but also covered it completely, hiding them from the rebel sensors. They waited in the darkness for 6 hours, while the rebels searched for survivors. Jake used that time to prepare an escape plan that involved combining technology from both their ships. He stripped the drive system from Zara's vessel and connected it to the station cargo pod using cables and power cells from the mining equipment. The result was ugly and probably dangerous, but it might be able to get them away from the asteroid. When the rebels finally gave up and left to search other areas, Jake and Zara made their escape in the makeshift ship. The hybrid vessel shook violently and made alarming noises, but the alien drive system was powerful enough to push them toward the edge of the solar system. Behind them, the mining station was buried under tons of rock, but Sam and the others were safe in the reinforced bunkers with enough supplies to wait for rescue. Their ship broke down twice during the 3-day journey to neutral space. Each time, Jake had to go outside in his spacesuit to repair connections and reroute power while Zara kept the life support working from inside. They made a good team, even though they still had trouble communicating about technical details. Zara was amazed by Jake's ability to fix things with whatever materials were available, while Jake was impressed by how quickly she learned to operate human equipment during their long journey. Zara told Jake about the political situation in her home empire. She was the crown princess of the Veltharian Empire and had been on a diplomatic mission to secure alliances with other star nations. The rebels, led by Commander Vex, wanted to overthrow the monarchy and install a military government that would expand their territory through conquest rather than diplomacy. Jake learned that the Veltharians were an ancient race with technology far beyond what humans had achieved. They controlled dozens of star systems and had been the dominant power in their region of the galaxy for thousands of years. However, their conservative culture made it difficult for them to adapt to changing political situations and younger species were beginning to challenge their authority. Princess Zara explained that she had been trying to form alliances with newer civilizations to strengthen her empire without resorting to military expansion. The rebels saw this as weakness and wanted to return to the old ways of conquest and domination. If they succeeded in killing her, the throne would go to her cousin Prince Drac, who supported the military faction and would likely start wars with neighboring systems. Their makeshift ship finally limped into Port Nexus, which was a massive space station built inside a hollowed-out moon. The port was neutral territory where trader smugglers and mercenaries from across the galaxy came to do business away from government interference. Jake had heard stories about the place but had never imagined he would actually visit such a dangerous and exotic location. Getting their ship repaired at Port Nexus required negotiations with several different alien mechanics and parts dealers. Jake's experience with mining equipment gave him insights into alien technology that surprised the local experts. He was able to identify compatible components and suggest modifications that would improve their ship's performance while keeping costs down. Zara's royal bearing attracted unwanted attention from bounty hunters and information brokers who recognized her despite her attempts at disguise. Jake had to use his street smarts and knowledge of criminal behavior to navigate the port's complex social dynamics. He made deals with the right people and avoided conflicts with dangerous individuals while gathering the supplies they needed. The most serious threat came when 3 Korthic bounty hunters cornered them in a cantina popular with smugglers and pirates. The Korthak were large reptilian humanoids with natural armor and powerful weapons who worked as mercenaries throughout the galaxy. They had been hired by the rebels to capture Princess Zara alive and return her to Commander Vex for public execution. Jake knew they could not fight 3 trained Korthic warriors in direct combat, so he used the cantina environment to his advantage. He started a brawl between rival smuggler gangs, then used the chaos to separate the bounty hunters and deal with them one at a time. His unconventional fighting style and willingness to use improvised weapons confused the Korthic who were used to facing opponents who followed military combat doctrine. By the time port security arrived to break up the fight, all 3 bounty hunters were unconscious and Jake was helping an injured Zara toward their repaired ship. Word of the human who had defeated 3 Korthic warriors spread quickly through the criminal underground, and Jake found that his reputation opened doors that had been closed before. Zara watched him navigate these dangerous waters with growing respect and began to see humans as far more capable than she had initially believed. The journey to Velor Prime took 5 days through hyperspace lanes that Jake could barely comprehend. Their repaired ship moved through dimensions that twisted his perception and made his head ache, but Zara seemed completely comfortable with the strange physics involved. She spent the time teaching him basic Veltharian customs and protocols that would help him survive in the royal court without accidentally insulting anyone important. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace, Jake's breath caught in his throat. As he saw the Veltharian homeworld for the first time, the planet was surrounded by orbital cities connected by streams of light that pulsed with constant traffic. Massive ships moved between the installations like schools of metallic fish, while smaller craft darted around them carrying passengers and cargo. To every corner of the system, the capital city of Velor Prime floated in the upper atmosphere, supported by anti-gravity generators that had been running for over 10,000 years. From space, it looked like a collection of crystal spires and flowing bridges that defied every law of physics Jake understood. The architecture seemed to grow rather than be built, with organic curves and surfaces that shifted color as the light changed. Their approach to the royal landing pad was escorted by a squadron of fighters whose elegant design made Jake's hybrid ship look like scrap metal held together with wire and hope. The Veltharian pilots flew in perfect formation without any visible effort while Jake struggled to keep their patch together. Vessel stable in the planet's complex magnetic fields and atmospheric currents, Princess Zara's return caused immediate excitement throughout the palace as news of her survival spread through the communication networks. Jake watched through the ship's viewports as crowds of Veltharians gathered to welcome their princes home. They were tall and graceful with the same pale blue skin and flowing hair as Zara, but their clothes were more elaborate and their jewelry seemed to generate its own light. Queen Lyra met them at the landing pad surrounded by royal guards whose armor looked like it had been grown from living metal. The queen was an older version of her daughter with silver hair and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. She embraced Zara with obvious relief, but her gaze fixed on Jake with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion that made him feel very small and out of place. The royal palace was beyond anything Jake had imagined possible. Corridors stretched for kilometers in directions that seemed to fold back on themselves while rooms opened into spaces that were clearly larger inside than outside. Gardens floated in mid-air filled with plants from across the galaxy while fountains flowed upward in streams of liquid crystal that sang as they moved. Jake's quarters were larger than his entire apartment back on Earth and furnished with items that responded to his presence by adjusting their shape and function. The bed formed itself around his body for perfect comfort, while the walls displayed images of peaceful landscapes from worlds he had never seen. Everything was beautiful and functional, but also completely alien in ways that made him homesick for simple human technology. The formal presentation to the royal court was scheduled for the day after their arrival, but Jake spent most of that time trying to understand Veltharian etiquette with Zara's patient guidance. The protocols were complex and based on concepts of honor and precedence that had evolved over millennia. A wrong gesture or inappropriate response could be interpreted as an insult that might have serious diplomatic consequences. When the day arrived, Jake found himself standing before an assembly of the most powerful beings in the Veltharian Empire. The throne room was vast with a ceiling that opened directly to the sky and walls covered in murals depicting the history of their civilization. Hundreds of nobles and officials filled the space, their conversations creating a sound like wind through crystal chimes. Queen Lyra sat on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single enormous gem, while Princess Zara stood at her right side, wearing robes that flowed like liquid starlight. Jake felt very human and very small in his best suit, which had been cleaned and pressed, but still looked primitive compared to the elaborate clothing around him. The presentation began with formal speeches about Princess Zara's diplomatic mission and her safe return home. Several nobles questioned her about the rebel attack and her time in human space, while Jake stood quietly beside her, trying not to attract attention. He could feel hundreds of eyes examining him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. The situation changed dramatically when assassins struck during the middle of the ceremony. They had somehow infiltrated the palace, disguised as servants, and struck without warning using weapons that fired beams of concentrated energy. The royal guards reacted quickly, but the attackers had positioned themselves perfectly to create maximum chaos and confusion. Jake's paranoid instincts kicked in immediately as he tackled Princess Zara to the floor and rolled them both behind the massive throne for cover. While the elegant Veltharian nobles stood frozen in shock, Jake was already analyzing the attack pattern and identifying the most dangerous threats. His experience with criminal behavior told him this was not a simple assassination attempt, but part of a larger plan. The assassins were trying to herd the royal family toward a specific exit, where more attackers were probably waiting. Jake grabbed a ceremonial weapon from a fallen guard and began moving through the chaos using the panicked nobles as cover while he hunted the infiltrators. His unconventional approach confused the assassins, who expected either direct confrontation or defensive positioning. By the time the royal guards had restored order, Jake had captured two of the assassins alive and identified the escape route they had planned to use. His ability to think like a criminal rather than a soldier had revealed weaknesses in the palace security that the traditional Veltharian military mindset had missed completely. The interrogation of the captured assassins revealed a conspiracy involving several high-ranking nobles who had been secretly supporting the rebel cause. Jake's questions focused on practical details like timing and logistics, while the Veltharian investigators pursued more traditional lines of inquiry about motives and political allegiances. Queen Lyra watched the human work with growing interest, as he uncovered connections that her own security forces had missed. His direct approach and willingness to consider dishonorable possibilities made him effective at understanding criminal thinking in ways that the noble-minded Veltharians struggled with. The final test came when the court scholars presented Jake with an ancient puzzle that had challenged Veltharian minds for over 1,000 years. The problem involved a complex mathematical relationship between stellar positions and energy flows that required advanced knowledge of physics and astronomy to solve. Jake stared at the glowing symbols for several minutes while the assembled nobles waited to see if the primitive human could comprehend their sophisticated intellectual challenge. Instead of trying to work out the mathematical relationships, Jake approached the puzzle from a completely different direction. He recognized it as a pattern-matching problem similar to diagnostic challenges he had faced with mining equipment. By treating the stellar positions as components in a system and the energy flows as connections between them, he was able to identify the missing element that made the whole pattern work. The solution was elegant and obvious once Jake explained his reasoning, but none of the Veltharian scholars had ever considered approaching the problem from that angle. Their advanced mathematical knowledge had actually made the puzzle more difficult by encouraging them to look for complex solutions, when a simple pattern recognition approach was all that was needed. The news arrived 3 days after the assassination attempt, when scout ships brought word that Commander Vex had declared open rebellion against the crown. The separatist forces had joined with the Korthic Empire, bringing thousands of warships and millions of soldiers against the Loyalist fleet. Traditional Veltharian battle doctrine called for honorable combat between equal forces, but the rebels had abandoned such concepts in favor of overwhelming numerical superiority. Queen Lyra War Council in the palace strategic center, where holographic displays showed the positions of both fleets across dozens of star systems. The Loyalist forces were scattered and outnumbered, while the Rebel Alliance controlled key hyperspace routes that would allow them to strike at the heart of the Empire. Admiral Kane and his senior officers studied the tactical situation with growing concern as reports arrived of Loyalist defeats on multiple fronts. Jake found himself included in these meetings despite protests from several military commanders, who questioned what a primitive human could contribute to advanced space warfare. Princess Zara insisted that his unconventional thinking had already proven valuable, and Queen Lyra supported her daughter's judgment. Jake sat quietly in the corner trying to understand the complex three-dimensional battle displays while the Veltharian generals debated traditional military responses. The first major engagement took place in the Tertian system, where Admiral Kane attempted to intercept a rebel supply convoy with a force of 30 cruisers. The battle followed classical Veltharian tactics, with both fleets forming elegant formations and exchanging fire at long range while maneuvering for positional advantage. The result was a devastating defeat for the Loyalists, who lost half their ships while the rebels continued toward their target virtually unharmed. Jake watched the battle recordings and noticed patterns that the Veltharian commanders had missed. The rebels were using their Korthic allies as expendable frontline units while keeping their own ships in reserve for decisive strikes. They coordinated their attacks through rapid communication bursts that allowed them to concentrate fire on individual targets before the Loyalist formations could respond effectively. When Jake suggested modifications to Loyalist tactics during the next War Council meeting, his ideas were initially dismissed as crude and dishonorable. Veltharian military tradition emphasized individual skill and elegant maneuvering over the kind of coordinated mass attacks that Jake proposed. Admiral Kane pointed out that their weapons and defenses were designed for honorable single combat not the chaotic melee style that humans seem to prefer. The turning point came when the rebels launched a surprise attack on the Proxima defense station using a combination of stealth ships and coordinated assault tactics that overwhelmed the Loyalist defenders. Jake had predicted exactly this kind of attack based on the patterns he had observed in previous battles, but his warnings had been ignored by commanders, who believed their traditional defenses were adequate. Princess Zara used her influence to get Jake appointed as an unofficial tactical advisor with permission to work directly with younger officers, who were more willing to consider new approaches. He began developing hybrid strategies that combined Veltharian honor with human pragmatism, creating small unit tactics that could operate effectively against superior numbers. Jake's first field command was a mixed squadron of damaged Loyalist ships and human volunteer vessels that had arrived as part of an aid convoy from Earth. The human ships were primitive by Veltharian standards, but they were tough and reliable with crews who understood improvisation and adaptation. Jake welded this unlikely force into an effective strike unit by giving each ship specific roles that played to their strengths. Rather than trying to make them fight like traditional Veltharian formations, their first mission was to harass rebel supply lines in the outer systems where conventional Loyalist forces had been unable to operate effectively. Jake used hit-and-run tactics that struck quickly at vulnerable targets, then disappeared before enemy reinforcements could arrive. His mixed squadron attacked fuel depots, communication relays, and isolated patrol ships, while avoiding direct confrontation with major rebel formations. The rebels responded by sending hunting groups to track down Jake's raiders, but they had difficulty adapting to his unpredictable tactics. Veltharian commanders on both sides were trained to think in terms of honor and direct confrontation, while Jake approached each engagement like a problem to be solved using whatever tools were available. He used asteroid fields and nebula clouds to hide his ships while setting up ambush that struck from unexpected directions. Jake's success attracted volunteers from across the Loyalist fleet as word spread about the human who was actually winning battles against the rebels. Young Veltharian officers brought their ships to join his growing force, while veteran commanders began studying his methods and adapting them for larger-scale operations. The rigid hierarchy of the traditional military started to bend as results became more important than protocol. The decisive engagement came when Commander Vex personally led a major assault on the Veltharian homeworld with over 200 ships in a massive fleet formation. Admiral Kane positioned the Loyalist forces according to traditional defensive doctrine, creating layered lines of resistance designed to wear down the attacking force through attrition. Jake was given command of a reserve force with orders to exploit any opportunities that developed during the battle. The initial phase went according to Veltharian expectations, with both fleets forming up at maximum range and beginning the formal exchange of fire that would determine the outcome through superior skill and firepower. Commander Vex had learned from previous battles and used his numerical advantage to concentrate overwhelming force against individual sections of the defensive line, while his Korthik allies provided cover for the main assault. Jake watched the battle develop and saw that the traditional Loyalist response was failing just as it had in previous engagements. The rebels were systematically destroying defensive positions, while maintaining their own formation integrity through superior numbers and coordination. Unless something changed quickly, the homeworld defenses would collapse and Queen Lyra would be forced to surrender or die fighting instead of reinforcing. The failing defensive line, Jake led his reserve force on a wide flanking maneuver that took them around the edge of the battle and directly toward the rebel command ships. His mixed squadron used every trick he had developed during months of raiding operations to penetrate the enemy formation and strike at the heart of their command structure. The attack came from an angle that Commander Vex had not anticipated, because it required ships to operate outside their normal tactical parameters. Jake's human crewed vessels absorbed tremendous damage while his Veltharian allies provided cover and support in a coordinated assault that broke through multiple defensive layers to reach the rebel flagship. The battle became a chaotic melee, as both sides abandoned their formations and fought ship to ship in the kind of close range combat that favored aggressive tactics over elegant maneuvering. Jake coordinated his forces through rapid-fire communications, while targeting key enemy systems and commanders in a systematic campaign to destroy rebel coordination and morale. When Commander Vex's flagship exploded after Jake's personal ship rammed it at full speed, the remaining rebel forces lost their unity and began retreating toward the outer systems. The Korthak allies abandoned their human partners and withdrew from Veltharian space, while Loyalist forces pursued the scattered remnants of the Separatist fleet. The victory celebration lasted for 3 days throughout the Veltharian Empire as news of Commander Vex's defeat spread across the star systems. Loyalist forces hunted down the scattered rebel remnants while diplomatic missions worked to restore order in the outer territories. The Korthak Empire formally apologized for their involvement and withdrew all forces from Veltharian space in exchange for avoiding a larger war that would have devastated both civilizations. Jake found himself uncomfortable with the hero worship that followed his role in the final battle. Veltharian nobles who had previously ignored or dismissed him now sought his attention and advice, while military officers studied recordings of his tactics with intense focus. He preferred working with his mixed squadron to help restore order in the damaged systems rather than attending formal ceremonies in the capital. Princess Zara was busy preparing for her coronation ceremony, which had been delayed by the war but could no longer be postponed. According to ancient tradition, she had to demonstrate her worthiness to rule through a series of challenges that tested her wisdom, courage, and ability to unite different factions within the empire. The ceremony would include representatives from across Veltharian space as well as foreign dignitaries from allied civilizations. Queen Lyra announced her intention to abdicate the throne once her daughter was formally crowned as the new empress. The old queen had ruled wisely for over 2 centuries, but she believed that the empire needed younger leadership to face the challenges of a changing galaxy. The transition would mark the beginning of a new era in Veltharian history, with Princess Zara bringing fresh ideas and perspectives to the ancient monarchy. Jake spent weeks learning the protocols for the coronation ceremony, which would require him to participate as Princess Zara's chosen witness and advisor. The role was traditionally filled by a high-ranking noble or military commander, but Zara had insisted that Jake's contributions to her survival and the Empire's victory earned him the honor. Several conservative nobles objected to having a human in such an important position, but Queen Lyra supported her daughter's decision. The coronation took place in the Grand Assembly Hall, which was large enough to hold representatives from every world in the Empire. The ancient chamber had hosted similar ceremonies for thousands of years, with walls that recorded the images and voices of every ruler in Veltharian history. Floating platforms arranged in concentric circles allowed delegates to observe the proceedings while maintaining their proper positions. According to rank and precedence, Princess Zara wore the traditional crown jewels, which had been crafted by master artisans using crystals from the original Veltharian homeworld. Her ceremonial robes were woven with threads that captured and reflected light in patterns that told the story of her lineage and achievements. She looked every inch the empress she was about to become, but Jake could see the nervousness in her golden eyes as the moment approached. The ceremony began with ancient rituals that traced back to the founding of the empire, including formal challenges from representatives of the major noble houses. Each challenger questioned Princess Zara about her qualifications to rule and her plans for addressing various political and social issues. Her responses demonstrated the wisdom and diplomatic skill she had developed during her years as heir to the throne. The final challenge came from Lord Deven, who was the eldest member of the Noble Council and keeper of ancient traditions. He rose from his platform with dignity, befitting his advanced age and position, then asked the question that would determine whether Princess Zara was truly ready to become empress. The hall fell silent as thousands of beings waited to hear what challenge would conclude the formal proceedings. Instead of asking about military strategy or economic policy, Lord Deven pointed directly at Jake and spoke the words that would become legend throughout the empire. His voice carried clearly through the vast chamber as he asked Princess Zara to explain who this human was and why he had been given such an important role in Veltharian society. The question seemed simple, but everyone understood that her answer would define the future relationship between their civilizations. Princess. Zara stepped forward and looked directly at Jake before turning to address the assembled delegates. She spoke clearly and without hesitation as she explained that Jake Collins was not merely an ally or advisor, but her chosen partner in ruling the Empire. The announcement caused shocked murmurs throughout the hall as nobles and officials tried to process the implications of what they had just heard. She continued by describing everything Jake had accomplished since their first meeting on the mining station. She told them how his mechanical skills had saved her life and how his tactical thinking had won the war against the rebels. More importantly, she explained that Jake represented qualities the Veltharian Empire needed to survive in a changing galaxy where traditional approaches were no longer sufficient to meet new challenges. Princess. Zara declared that the Empire's strength came not from the purity of their bloodlines or the elegance of their technology, but from their ability to learn from other civilizations and adapt to changing circumstances. She pointed out that Jake's human perspective had revealed weaknesses in their society that might have led to defeat. If they had remained isolated from outside influences, the hall erupted in debate as delegates argued about the wisdom of integrating human leadership into their ancient government structure. Conservative nobles warned about the dangers of abandoning traditional values while younger voices supported Princess Zara's vision of a more inclusive and adaptable empire. The discussion continued for hours as different factions presented their arguments for and against the proposed changes. Jake finally stood and asked for permission to address the assembly directly. The hall fell silent as the human who had helped save their empire prepared to speak about his role in their future. He looked around at the thousands of faces watching him and felt the weight of history as he began to explain what he had learned about both civilizations during their time together. He spoke about the strength he had found in Veltharian honor and wisdom while describing what humans could contribute through their adaptability and problem-solving skills. He proposed that true leadership required combining the best qualities of different species rather than trying to maintain artificial barriers between civilizations. His words were translated into dozens of languages as delegates from across the galaxy listened to the human perspective on interstellar cooperation. Jake concluded by accepting the role of co-ruler not as a conquest or replacement, but as a partnership that would strengthen both civilizations. He promised to learn from Veltharian traditions while contributing human innovations that would help the Empire face future challenges. The combination of ancient wisdom and adaptive thinking would create something greater than either civilization could achieve alone. Queen Lyra rose from her throne and formally accepted Jake as her daughter's partner and co-ruler of the Empire. The coronation concluded with Princess Zara becoming Empress Zara, while Jake was granted the title of Imperial Consort with full authority to participate in government decisions. Together they would lead the Veltharian Empire into a new era of cooperation and exploration among the stars. The first crisis of their joint reign came just weeks later when the Andromedan coalition requested assistance with a plague that was devastating their outer colonies. Jake and Zara worked together to organize a relief mission that combined Veltharian medical technology with human logistical expertise. Their success in saving millions of lives established them as leaders who could unite different species in pursuit of common goals and proved that their partnership was more than just political symbolism.